Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Sarah Maslin Nir, a New York Times Metro breaking news reporter. She's been with the Times since August of 2011. She currently covers breaking news, as I said, with the Metro section. She's also the author of Horse Crazy. There are several articles. If you saw the Twitter thread this week, several articles that Sarah has written that we'll take a look at. But most notably, the drowning deaths in New York from Hurricane Ida just this week, the Unvarnished series about nail salons in New York, the Central Park birder last year, and even the lockdown of New Rochelle in the early days of COVID last year. She was also the Nocturnalist columnist for the New York Times, covering 200 parties in 2 years. So we'll definitely ask her about that. Sri, of course, is the Marshall Loeb Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors, a digital and virtual events consultancy. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and sometime guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're also live on Sarah's Facebook page. Sarah, thank you so much for allowing us to go live on your page. Please let us know where you're watching from. Please tag friends, retweet, share, like, etc. If you're watching on Facebook or even on Twitter, make sure to press play on the video so that if you leave a comment, we'll be sure to see it. Joining us this morning, Jonathan Borstein from the East Village, and he's certainly offering his thoughts for people dealing with the effects of Hurricane Ida. My mom is watching from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. Mom, I know my mom's garage and basement were flooded, so she had to deal with a lot of cleanup. So hang in there, Mom, and appreciate everything. Doug Levy is watching from San Francisco at 5:30 in the morning. Doug, I know this is a normal time for you. This is when you wake up, but we still think it's incredible and huge that you spend your early morning hours with us, an East Coast-based show. But thank you, Doug. Always appreciate it. Ellen is joining us from the Upper East Side. Ellen, thank you. Our friend Stephen Kaplan is joining us from Ramsey, New Jersey. And again, a lot of comments about Hurricane Ida. Patricia Freudenberg watching from New York. Patricia, good to see you. And Diane Stefani watching from Margate, New Jersey, another friend and consistent viewer of the show. So with that, I'd like to bring in our host, Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
How are you?
Great to be here. Great to see you. Thank you for all you do to make this show possible. You're our executive producer. You also run these masterful Twitter threads every weekend. I think it's a class in how to tell stories using Twitter threads. Everyone should take a look. Just search the hashtag NYT Read Along and follow Neil at Neil Parekh. I am so excited that we are having Sarah with us. Sarah Maslin Nir is a former student of mine and a rock star at the Times. She has been a force to reckon with as a reporter covering the city in so many different aspects of it. And we are just delighted that she is going to be with us. We talked first about doing this show together last spring because she had gotten COVID and recovered from it. So we talked about talking about that, and it's taken us these 18 months to be together. So there's the Twitter thread. It's a great preview of all the things we're going to be talking about. By the way, let's just pause there because people might wonder what that story is. This is about Black surfers, a story done by Diane Cardwell, who was a guest on our show this year. And we are just delighted to see when former guests have continued success and we're able to talk about it. So this is the thread. That's Mary Curtis, one of our former guests, who has won a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Newspaper Columnists Association. So we are thrilled for her, and Mary is a terrific friend. It's called the National Society of Newspaper Columnists. and she's won the Ernie Pyle Lifetime Achievement Award. So congrats to Mary. And of course, a lot of people are thinking about horses these 2 weeks because of the crisis, the uniquely American crisis around the pandemic and people eating horse dewormer. I'm sure we'll have a chance to ask Sarah, who's written a book called Horse Crazy, and about that particular aspect. But we do want to thank our terrific staff who put this together. They do such great work. The production team, Neil Parekh is our EP, and our producers are Carla Baranakis and Paula Kiger. Carla is at Kabara. Paula Kiger is at Big Green Pen. Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve, and Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks. Please follow all of them. And this is an example of a show that DigiMentors puts together. We do shows like this for other people. We do conferences, workshops, online webinars, summits, talk shows. If you are interested in any of this, please reach out to us. We'd love to work with you. And Neil, I know you and I have reflected on this, that we're now going into another season of virtual events when we have had clients tell us that for the second go around, they were going to switch to an in-person event or with us in a hybrid event. Instead, they're being forced to go virtual again. And you and I wish that people didn't need our services, because that would mean that we were past the pandemic. But given the Delta variant and given the really bad leadership we've seen from some politicians and influencers and places like Fox, the way the pandemic has continued in the US is just stunning and so sad.
I think long term, Sri, what we're seeing is you're right. A number of clients are coming to us for a second annual event this fall, which when they didn't think they would be. But long term, I think a lot of clients are seeing the value of online and hybrid events in terms of the reach that they can have for their content. So I think the future might be really more in hybrid, where you get that in-person experience and a strong online experience for a larger audience than that can travel to a particular location.
One of the things that we do so well on the show, thanks to our producers, is things like this. You're seeing Paula is annotating the show as we go along. We mentioned the Black Surfer story. There it is. We mentioned Mary Curtis, and here is her award. We mentioned Horse Crazy, the book by Sarah Maslin Nir, and here it is. So this is what we do, is not a Zoom call, though we have worked with clients who want that Zoom format. But we do these television style productions, and we're so proud of what we're able to do. And Jonathan says, given the advantages of virtual events, will they ever end? And I think this is what you were alluding to as well, Neil. My thought is that we will go back to IRL events if and when the pandemic is over, but there will always be a virtual component for people who can't travel, don't want to travel. That's going to be there for months and maybe years to come. And I still wish these were all because people wanted to do it and not because they had to do it because of the way this pandemic's been handled. We do want to say that we are supported on this show by our friends at Muckrack, and our sponsors make the show like this possible. Muckrack is an amazing set of tools for journalists as well as PR folks, and everyone should take a look. Journalists have free access to the Muckrack system. PR folks pay for it. Please check it out, muckrack.com. And to everyone watching, if you have something you want to promote, a book or a program or anything, talk to us about being a sponsor. It's very inexpensive and very cost effective. So definitely take a look and write to me, Sri@Sri.net or Neil@Digimentors.group. We would love to talk to you. So we are getting ready to bring our friend Sarah on the screen in just a minute. Before that, we want to show you the New York Times in the print edition. If you've never seen the show before, this is what we do. We read aloud the Sunday New York Times. We've been doing that for 5.5 years. This October will be number 6, the start of our 6th year, which is hard to imagine. And Doug says, Muckrack is a phenomenal tool. I depend on it. Thank you, Doug. Watching super early, as Neil said, from California. And Doug has a wonderful Substack that you should all subscribe to about coronavirus, accurate information, communications during the crisis. Check that out at douglevy.substack.com. Ted's watching from Washington. Miriam says, aside from not having to travel for virtual events and their wider reach, I like the fact that with the Zoom or other virtual events, I always have a front row seat, can see and hear well. You're so right about that, Miriam. In fact, before the Delta variant came so strong, I was at some informal lunches with friends, and I missed not being able to just turn up the volume to hear what they're saying, especially as they were talking through masks. And I said, boy, maybe I like talking to people in a system like this as well. But let's get to the paper, and then we will.
I was just putting up Doug Levy's Substack, Sri.
Oh, nice. Very
since
nice.
You mentioned it.
Yes.
That's one of the advantages of the platform, the work we do, and the platform we use, being able to screen share and bring in content quickly.
Excellent. So let's take a quick look at the paper, and then we'll bring Sarah on to talk to us. And it's been an incredibly busy news week. There is no August lull in American journalism anymore. And we want to show you all the different ways in which the news has been covered in the Times. So the front page we'll get to, the lead stories about the worry about a crypto boom invading banking, and about Louisiana and what's happened there. The Sunday Styles cover is Man on the Moves. From Lil Nas X to Cardi B, Sean Bankhead has choreographed some of the year's biggest music videos. Here is a stunning magazine story, cover story. Ted Albury is an idealistic FBI agent who turned whistleblower. And he said, I helped destroy people, especially when it came to the post 9/11 terror watch and what they did to Muslim communities all over America. The Sunday Review cover is Beyond Consent, what's really going on when professors sleep with their students. Amia Srinivasan, no relative, no relation. She is a professor at Oxford who's written a book called The Right to Sex. And she's a philosopher, among other things. The book review cover is The Longest War, The American War in Afghanistan, a history by Carter Malkasian, and The Afghanistan Papers, A Secret History of the War by Craig Whitlock. In the book review, the design cover is Room for Everyone, Designing the Multi-Generational Home. This is what life in India has been like for generations, thousands of years, multi-generational homes. Even in modern India, lots of people live like that, millions of people, and that's coming to America. Something, Neil, I never thought I would be saying. And here is the Hard Education in Debt collection. And this is the Metropolitan cover. The Metropolitan section is interesting because you only find it online, in print in the metropolitan area. You don't get it even if you're a subscriber elsewhere. And the real estate cover is Turning the Light Back On. New owners are reviving motels, once a convenience of the American road trip. As an Indian American, I pay attention to the motel industry. Our friend Tunku Vardarajan once wrote a New York Times Magazine article called The Patel Motel Cartel, and about how there are so many folks there who are South Asian, who are Indian American, who own motels. And here is the cover of Monica Lewinsky, according to herself. She's a producer of the FX series Impeachment, which is coming out soon. And the way she has been able to combat the cyberbullying and everything has been really amazing to see. The business cover story is Gripped by Heat, Smoke, and Drought, and as extreme weather seizes the Pacific Northwest, farm owners and field workers struggle to adapt. Sometimes the response feels improvised and inadequate. And that's the tour of all the papers. And now I'm ready to see Sarah.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah. Great to see you. Thank you for getting up in the morning. You were the Nocturnalist columnist at the New York Times. So you were out late night covering stories, and I remember you as a student. I would get emails from you very, very late at night, so I knew you were a late night person. So tell me what it's like to be up on Sunday at 8:30 or earlier.
Yes, well, those days are long past. In 2010, I was the Nocturnalist. I covered, as Neil said, to correct him slightly, 252 parties in 18 months. And now I am a certified horse girl, as my book reveals. And so horses and horse girls wake up quite early. So this is my hour now.
Okay. Well, welcome and thank you for being here. You have had an incredible ride at the New York Times, so to speak, already. And just this week shows you the value of what kind of journalism training you've had, the work that you've done, right? When you think about the kind of stories you had to write just this week. Let's start there. Let's talk about the stories that you have done just this week with the hurricane and everything that resulted from it.
Sure. So what was really interesting is when I got my job as the Nocturnalist, they offered me this nightlife gig, and I got very anxious, and I said, I'm really concerned I will be pigeonholed if I take this position, as like a party girl, as a blonde floozy. I already kind of look like a blonde floozy. And they said, Carolyn Ryan said to me, if you can do one hard thing well, you can do another hard thing well. And that's all that we'll look for. And they were really true to their word. She said, telling true stories and interesting, engaging stories about nightlife is hard, getting celebrities to talk and engage. And so my job now, the stories I do now, they have almost nothing in common, right? The breadth and scope is totally different, but it's that same principle. So this week I did two stories. One I've been working on for quite a while about cocaine laced with fentanyl, and then this other one that you have on the screen, trapped in their basements and cars. They lost their lives in a savage storm, and that was about the unbelievable loss of life that is still, the death toll still mounting from this flash flood. And I can tell you how that story came together. It's actually
if you could, Sarah, but also just to put it in context, for those who are watching from overseas or even anywhere in the country, all the attention was on Louisiana, the build up to the storm. We knew what was coming there. And then this thing hits New York. Of course, there's big damage in Louisiana, but in New York, there are, triple the amount of deaths or something like that, maybe even more, in the New York State area. How did all that happen? And what is the unique role that basement apartments played in these deaths?
Yeah, so there's a lot of finger pointing in a couple arenas, right? New York had its first ever emergency flash flood warning from the National Weather Service. It's never happened, New York City, excuse me. And it came at about 9:30, which is right when the rain came down. You can blame the Weather Service perhaps not alerting people, but would people ever have thought that in their own apartments wasn't higher ground? And that's because we have this phenomenon of basement apartments, largely. It's where the city's poor are warehoused. They're illegal apartments. People carve cellars with have no egress into multiple dwellings, roommates, and they became death traps. During 1 hour, New York City had its wettest hour ever that night. Over 6 inches of rain fell through the course of the storm, and it all dumped into these apartments and drowned people in their homes. In New Jersey, we're just beginning to get the toll of it. Something a little different happened is I think 46 people have died and 6 are still missing. So we're probably going to have a death toll of 52 people for that hour-long storm. Most of them got swept away in their cars.
Oh, just horrifying. By the way, the Democratic candidate for mayor, nominee for mayor, lives in a basement apartment, or at least has a basement apartment. And I think he said that his was not flooded, but you're right that that's the way in which many people live in New York. And as you said, mostly the poor, and that's where they were trapped. We should also point out that that record that you mentioned for the wettest 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours that New York City set this week broke a record set 11 days ago.
Yeah.
So it's not like broke a record set in 1850. These are this feels like these once in a lifetime storms are just coming and coming and coming.
Well, what's also really interesting is when we talk about climate change, we don't often have the conversation of social equity in climate change. And the fact that the people most vulnerable to this are people who live in low-lying places, both in Louisiana and in New York City, that climate change is a social equity issue because mostly poor people were hit by this storm. They couldn't get to higher ground because their homes were underground.
It's such a pity that that's the situation, and we despair about what we're going to do when faced with the opportunity to do something about all of this. I think it'd be fair to say that how we as a country have responded to a visible enemy in the pandemic and the virus, visible meaning whose effects you can feel every single day, we've done a poor job. So I shudder at how we're going to respond to climate change. One of the shocking things we saw this week was that Fox News, as New York City officials started talking about climate change at one of their press conferences, cut away from the live shot saying they're talking politics about quote unquote climate change. That's where we are as a country, and it's all tied together in the other news stories, the pandemic, the reproductive rights story out of Texas. There's so much going on. Let's see some of the comments coming in. Marion Berkeley says, and poor people often can't travel away. That's
exactly
correct.
Right.
There were so many people trapped in Louisiana who couldn't leave. They don't have cars, or their jobs wouldn't let them get away in time. They need that money. My father's watching in Kerala. Hi, Dad. He says, joined just now as you started talking about the floods. Frightening results of climate change. My father was the first to teach me about climate change because he was negotiating UN treaties about and around climate change, global warming back in the 90s, and in fact went to that famous Rio conference in 92. And we would talk about how this is kind of the last chance. 92 was the last chance to do something. And here we are in 2021 feeling the effects of the changes that didn't happen and will not happen as we go forward. So thanks for watching, Dad. By the way, speaking of fathers, I want to tell you it was really moving to read the obituary of your father. Tell us a little bit about him.
Oh, thank you so much. And hi, we have someone joining from Dubai. My father was a Holocaust survivor. So not my grandpa, not my great-grandpa, my dad. He had me and he was quite elderly. And he had a really incredible story. He has a book called The Lost Childhood. If any of your producers want to pop it in, it is still available, about how he survived Hitler with a false baptismal certificate forged by an artist. He was 9 years old, forged for his whole family. And actually the gentleman, Ludwig Selig, kept going back to forge more certificates for people, and he was eventually murdered. But my father became a psychiatrist in New York City, specializing post-traumatic stress disorder because of what he knew. And what's really fascinating is that he spoke 7 languages. So he ended up being the go-to therapist for the Hasidic community because he could treat them in Yiddish and in Polish and in Russian. And, those insular religious communities, there's a lot of trauma. The lifestyle can also be traumatizing. And he was one of the only psychiatrists given by their head rabbi the hechsher to treat them.
And here's the book. It's called The Lost Childhood, the complete memoir of Yehuda Nir. And tell us about the last name and the backstory there.
Yeah, so thank you for asking. So my name is kind of weird, Sarah Nir. Maslin is my mother's name. I adopted it as my middle name after my grandmother died because there would be no more Maslins. But my dad's name, after the war, his name was actually Julius Grunfeld. And after the war, he felt he didn't want a Germanic name because those people had tried to murder him and had murdered his father. And he felt that he didn't want any of his success being attributed to that nice German guy. So he translated his name into Hebrew. Grunfeld means a green field, and Nir actually means a field. And he changed his first name to Yehuda, which means big Jew. so that nobody could ever think he was anything other than the Big Jew.
Incredible story. And we think of him today here. We should also point out that work that he did on PTSD, a term we use in so many ways today. When he started, that was not a term that was widely understood.
No, my father was a pioneer in PTSD. Actually, he was one of the originators of the discipline of treating it. And interestingly, during the 6-Day War, he actually missed his own wedding to go fight in that war. And they said, well, Dr. Nir, we don't need you. We don't need psychiatrists. And he said, I'm coming anyway. And he went and ended up staying for several months treating soldiers for what is now known as post-traumatic stress disorder, because they were so emotionally brutalized. But it's so interesting. They were like, no, it's a war. We don't need psychiatrists.
And now, of course, people understand that. We have some people checking in. So let's say hello.
Sure.
Sunny Slaughter is with us. Good morning, checking in from the Maryland area. Glad to join you all this morning. It's been forever. Sunny is a former guest and an incredible expert on fighting violence as well as DEI and other issues. So thank you for being with us, Sunny. Great to see you. I also saw that Ron Thomas is watching from Dubai. Ron sat in this at this dining table in Manhattan to visit with us when he was a guest on the show.
Nice.
But he's back in Dubai. And every week in the old days, he used to be checking in from another city. But Ron is awesome in so many ways. And Ron, thank you for tuning in. We truly appreciate you as well. So glad to have everybody here. If you're joining us for the first time, you're a friend of Sarah's and have never seen the show, I'm Sri Srinivasan, former professor at Columbia Journalism School, where I knew a young lady named Sarah who was a go-getter in every sense of the term, used to really work hard as a reporter, hustling, which is what you have to do. And now she's gone on to this wonderful career. I feel old as I see what all she has done in such a just at the start of her career, but now over all these years. Emily Silverman says hi to Sarah. Great to have you.
I think
Emily.
she's saying hi in Latin.
Yeah,
because I think amazing. Was my Latin teacher, right? Is that I believe.
Emily says climate change and social and economic justice isn't getting enough discussion, but it's gaining traction. My kiddo was looking to take a class entitled After Maria, and it filled up quickly. So that's I think young people definitely understand, because this is the world they're going to inherit. But unfortunately, the decisions are being made by the other generations, which are who aren't going to be around. So my dad likes my shirt. Sarah complimented my shirt earlier, so there's connections across the continents right there. My father and my mother are in Trivandrum in Kerala, in Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala. Have you been to India, Sarah?
I have. I've been to Rajasthan. I was a spa reviewer briefly before my New York Times career, and actually a big chunk of my book is about the diabolical way people import rare Indian Marwari horses. So India features pretty heavily in my book.
That's awesome. And so let's talk a little bit about the book, Horse Crazy, the story of a woman and a world in love with an animal. And the book has been called Fascinating, Funny, and a Moving Love Letter to These Graceful Animals. So tell us about the book. And then, of course, I have to ask you about the horse paste.
Sure. So, everywhere I've gone around the world for the New York Times, when I'm finished with my work, I sneak off and find the horses. And I've been doing that for years. And I kind of kept the fact that I was a secret horse obsessive secret on the DL, because I was worried I wouldn't be taken seriously in the very challenging things I cover for my day job. And I was speaking to a friend, and I was saying, I'd love to write a book of, something. He said, well, what do you write about? I said, the only thing I care about as much as journalism is horses. And he said, well, write that. I said, I can't possibly. And I explained why I felt that way. And he said, Sarah, passion translates. That's all people want. Is it a true passion? That will bridge divides. And that's what people want to read about. And I think those were immortal words. So I pitched this book to Simon Schuster. And at the end of my pitch, it was sort of an almanac of horses around the world. They said, well, Sarah, the end was, this isn't my story. This is the story of horses around the world. And they said, well, that's the one thing we disagree with. We think it is your story. And they pushed me to make it much more memoiristic. So the narrative thread of the book is my life with horses, the intergenerational trauma that I've experienced as a daughter of a Holocaust survivor, in my journey with these animals, and branching off are these crazy adventures with these wild people and wild animals I've encountered along the way.
Ron Thomas says, grew up in South Carolina and had a horse growing up. His name is Champ.
Cute.
All right. Ron, we've got to talk about that another time. That's awesome. And R. McEnany says, Sarah works so hard. I really admire how she navigates and shares her life.
Oh, Rachel is a tremendous asset to the state of New York, and she has done wonderful things for this state. We should all praise her.
And Sunny says, wow, what a story about your dad. And, you know, I was struck by the fact that you were the daughter of a Holocaust survivor rather than a granddaughter.
Yeah.
Were you among the youngest people who, who had a father or mother in the Holocaust?
I believe so, because my dad was 53 when he had me. So, there aren't too many Holocaust survivors left. So I imagine I'm probably one of the youngest who was able to spend significant time with their father. He died at 84. So I had him for a while, not long enough, but what's really interesting is that perspective, being the daughter of trauma and the daughter of people who there was an attempt to erase us from this planet, and having it so close to me has really informed my journalism. And one of the reasons I became a journalist was I wanted to make the world very small, because I felt if you could see that person in Afghanistan or that person in Sri Lanka as quite a bit like me, quite a bit like you, it would be harder to kill them, harder to wage war against them if they were just like someone you knew. And that's what I think journalism can do.
Well put. Manuel is watching from Spain. So hello, Manuel. Thank you for watching.
Hello.
And look at all the things I'm learning. Sunny had a horse as well. Sunny,
wonderful.
That's great. We've got to talk about that. And iDiplomacy tweets, Sarah started the Old Girls Club at the New York Times, which has encouraged many to pursue their passions. Tell us about this.
Yeah, I have to resurrect it. It's faded a little with the virus, but we really need it, I think. So Jill Abramson was giving a talk, actually thanking the day she got her job as the editor, and she said, I want to thank my girl crew, and she named a couple editors who had been her confidants. And I thought to myself, wow, I feel adversarial with women in the profession. It's very early on. I said, I feel that they're my competitors, and I feel mildly adversarial. And I read Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, where she says that every time a woman would walk into the writer's room, that the existent women writers, because there were so few, would bristle. And she called that a girl-on-girl hate crime. And she said, the more of us there are, the more there can be in these spaces. And I thought, I'm going to totally revamp my perspective. And I'm going to start a club like the old boys club that journalism and so many professions are, called the Old Girls Club. In the first meeting, there were 2 people, me and one other person. And now there's over 170 people in it. And we meet about once every other month. We have lunch, about 30, 35 of us, try to keep it a little intimate, with a real old girl. So we've had Maureen Dowd talk to us, and Carolyn Ryan, and even Gloria Steinem came. I cold called her, and she came and hung out with us, which was a life moment. But it's been pretty powerful. And one thing we do is we go around the table when you begin, which iDiplomacy, I don't know that person's handle, so they'll have to tell me who it is we go around and I'm sure they can say the one rule of Old Girls Club, which is there's no modesty allowed. So we go around and we say one thing we're proud of in any arena of our lives. But if you say well, I can't, it was pretty good, but I can't take credit, everybody's allowed to shout at you and say, take credit. Because I think women do that pathologically, undermine their success.
Well, that's Lariel Higa.
Lariel.
Yeah.
Lariel is the OOG of OGC.
She's awesome. So she's
wonderful.
That's great. And she says, She says hi. Let's just look at some of the other comments before we get to the paper. We haven't even started the paper
Oh
yet.
my
So
God, sorry.
let's talk about a few of the other comments. Doug says, learning how to ride a horse taught me much more than just how to ride a horse. That's great. Look at all these horse people coming out of the woodwork.
Well, that's the crux of Horse Crazy, is that it's not a book about horses. It's a book about obsession and about what drives it and what impels people. So I worked for the founder of the New York City Black Rodeo in Harlem, and that took me on to exploring the erased legacy of Black cowboys across the United States. And I flew in the belly of a 747 with trying to understand the big business of importing horses. So it's this journey into what drives us and why horses are so compelling. To Doug's point, there's 7 million horses in America, far more than there ever were when they were our actual way to get around. So they're totally useless, but for some reason they're more important than ever to people.
That's a stunning statistic, because they were our cars and trucks and everything else. So if there are more cars, there are more horses now. That's amazing. So that brings me, of course, to horse paste.
Yeah. So you want to go real deep with horse girls? You ready?
Yeah.
You hang out with horses, you will get horse worms. And so every little girl or little boy who's hung out with horses has taken ivermectin, because horses
But for
are
the
gross.
people, the human version, right?
Yes, the human version. So horses are gross and they do have worms, right? And people can get worms, and people can take ivermectin, right? And so can dogs. Every creature on a farm does. But there is no reason on God's green earth to take it for anything other than spending time with disgusting, wormy horses. Don't take it. Only take it if you're hanging out with vile horses who have worms. They're not vile, but they eat grass and they eat stuff on the ground and they get worms. So take it if you're around horses. Don't take it for COVID.
But just to understand, it's transmitted to humans from your touching the horses.
Yeah, it can be transmitted to dogs, humans, other horses. They eat the grass from the ground, so they pick up parasites as they do. And every spring, all those horses get a tube of ivermectin. And I can imagine that people who work with them get them too. But horses don't get COVID. Horses can't transmit COVID. Worms aren't COVID. Don't take ivermectin.
This should be our PSA that we put together about this.
Take it if you have worms.
Yes.
Don't take it if you have COVID. Let's hope you don't have worms. That's the lesson.
It's a very important lesson. James is asking about the erased legacy of Black cowboys.
Yeah, so in the pioneer era, 1 in 4 cowboys were in fact Black. And that has been a story that's been removed from the American narrative. And I often think that the cowboy narrative is sort of the narrative we tell ourselves about our own identity. I'm the daughter of an immigrant, and I still feel that the cowboy narrative is somehow my birthright, right? My legacy as an American. And the West was actually integrated because life was just too gosh darn hard on the other side of the mountains to keep up the strictures that pervaded in the more colonized areas. They were U.S. Marshals. They were the bad guys. But the West was actually a very important place for both freed and self-emancipated, formerly enslaved people because you could actually make a go of it out there. And that has been totally removed. And I'll give you another interesting fact about the erasure of Black people from the equestrian story. The first ever winner of the first ever Kentucky Derby was a Black man, and the trainer of that horse was an emancipated slave. In fact, in the early days of racing, people ran the horses they owned with the humans they owned on their backs, and they specifically went to West Africa to purchased humans who had equestrian skills, because there's a big equestrian culture in West Africa, to be their jockeys and train their horses. And American thoroughbred racing owes as much to Black people as the plantation and cotton and tobacco industries do, but that has not really been explored. And in exploring that in my book, I really try to understand who do stories belong to. Right. As a Jew, I always felt like an interloper in this elite, white, upper crusty world. And I'd say to my dad, this isn't our world, Dad. This is Ralph Lauren's world of jodhpurs and cashmere. And he'd be like, Sarah, not Ralph Lauren, Ralphie Lifshitz. Ralph Lauren is a Jew from New York, just like me, and that's Ralph Lauren's real name is Ralphie Lifshitz. To me, if you can understand that stories are who claims them, then the world is your oyster.
Thank you. So well put. Let's look at some of the comments that come in, and then we really have to get to the paper.
Yeah, let's do the paper.
Ron says, met a guy a few years back who uses horses in leadership development, building trust. And I can tell you that I learned to ride a horse for a few weeks when I was a kid, and it wasn't for me, but I could see the beauty of the animals for sure. And the power when you're sitting on them, you can, things could go wrong very fast is what I remember thinking. Sunny says there's a group of black cowboys based in the city of Philadelphia. They teach children about horses. There's a movie about it. Just saw it a few months ago and stars Idris Elba. Wow.
Yeah, the concrete cowboy movement is really interesting. It's slightly different than what I'm speaking of because my point is black people have always been part of the story. It's not just something that comes into a city to help children stay out of gangs, which is what the wonderful work they're doing in Philadelphia. My point is they've always been there, and there's a conversation which we might talk about Christian Cooper, that story about the black birder in Central Park. Does black people feel the outdoors does not belong to them, that they are not permitted to be hikers, and they're looked at suspiciously when they participate in nature. My point is they've always been part of all those stories.
Well, that was one of the most upsetting stories and among many, many upsetting stories of this past year. Let's talk about that. Two people named Cooper, unrelated, end up in together in a terrible situation. Let's talk about it. It's a story that went viral around the world, and that's the Cooper story. So you can talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. So Sri, you were one of the first ever digital natives I ever met, and so you understood the power of the internet. So I learned a lot from you in this way. And I saw this tweet of this little video clip of a woman screaming, cursing at a black man, saying she was going to call the police on him and say that he was trying to kill her. And he wasn't trying to kill her. He was trying to get her to leash her dog. And I saw that it just had way too many views. Like there was something happening around it. It wasn't just a shocking video like a car crash. It was having an effect. So I said to my boss, we have to figure out what's happening here and why this is touching such a nerve. And it was during the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was a white woman weaponizing her privilege against a black man. They both played a part in this kerfuffle in the park, but certainly she went nuclear on it and took it to a dark place. So I actually reached out to Christian. I reached out to Christian Cooper, the gentleman, and many people wanted to interview him about his thoughts. And a colleague had a great idea because Christian Cooper is a huge nerd who loves to bird. And so I said, Christian, let's go birding together. And he was like, you know what? Everyone else has asked me for an interview on this. He's like, I want to go birding. And we walked around Central Park, really taking stock of how he was so deeply threatened. His life was threatened just trying to do this activity that was meaningful to him and what that meant as a black man. And it ended up being a very powerful insight into the story. One of my deepest regrets is when I did a larger story on the two of them, Ms. Cooper wouldn't speak to me. I would have really wanted to hear her perspective. Her life was destroyed by this. She lost her job. She can't walk in public. She almost lost her dog because she's choking it out there. Christian Cooper has since said that he feels what she suffered was too big a consequence for her actions. And yet he also believes that it's important to highlight the danger that black people are put in by racism at all times.
Yeah, just a horrifying set of circumstances. And nothing happened that day, but we have seen the cops called on black people and things going completely wrong. And so just because it didn't go as badly as it could have, doesn't mean that we don't pay attention. So thank you for that. But we really have to get to the paper, Sarah. We want to welcome everybody. This is Sarah Maslin Nir, reporter at the New York Times, and she covers breaking news, among other things, the author of Horse Crazy. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to do kind of a tour of the Times, and then she's going to jump in, talk about things she knows, things she wants to comment on, any inside baseball that she can share with us about her colleagues, we're welcome. We welcome all of it. So thank you. We do this every Sunday, 8:30 to 10 a.m. Eastern time, and we have some fabulous guests coming up in the days ahead. So please stay tuned for that information as well. So I'm going to turn on my camera here and get right to the paper. The front story is officials worry about the crypto boom and the scramble to regulate. Do you own any cryptocurrency, Sarah?
I feel like I should have gotten on that. No, I was too busy, spending all my money on horses. I should have bought some crypto.
You know what? There's a little tidbit about how in 2010, one Bitcoin could buy you 2 Big Macs. Today, 1 Bitcoin can buy you a Tesla. Like that shows you how things have changed. Sunny Slaughter says, so glad you broke the story. As a law enforcement instructor, her actions were dangerous. Thank you. That's Sunny talking about the Christian Cooper story. Okay, here is the story out of Louisiana, where officials have been trying for years to secure funding for a levee system similar to the one in New Orleans. So this is in a different part of Louisiana. Lessons, protecting everyone may be out of reach, and that is so difficult to understand. Where tower stood, rebirth grinds to a halt, and this is about 9/11, and we're coming up on the 20th anniversary, and next week, next Saturday is the 20th anniversary. Where were you that day, Sarah?
I actually attended for a year George Washington University before I transferred undergrad to Columbia. And I was in right next to the Watergate, which is across the Potomac from the Pentagon. So I actually saw the smoking of the crash into the Pentagon, which was another intense view. And being born and raised in New York City, I felt like I had it on both sides. And then before they ended up closing the train lines, I jumped on a train to go to New York City to find my parents that day. So it was just, I was as close as you could get on all angles without being under the shadow.
You were able to get to New York. I didn't realize the trains ran that long.
Yeah, I got on it before they shut it all down.
Wow. Okay. All right. Here is Biden is still mourning a son, but some can't bear his grief. A very odd framing for this story, but here it is on the front page about how President Biden brings up the story of Bo. We know how much Bo's death weighed on him, and the reason he didn't really run in 2016 was because of Bo, but then he, of course, ran in 2020, and here we are. So that's that story. This is a very upsetting story. In South Africa, a fatal mix of race and vigilantes, and this is, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the names right, but John Eligon and
Eligo.
Sorry?
Eligo. You don't pronounce the N. Yeah, I don't know why.
Okay, great. No, thank you. That's why we have the people from the Times with us. And Zanel MG is writing the story about Phoenix, a mostly Indian suburb in South Africa outside Durban, and how there have been something like 30 out of 30-something people who've been killed have been Black folks. This is a mix of racial divisions, of course, started during the apartheid era, but still having repercussions now. Very, very sad to see this story.
I have a great little story about Eligo, which will coincide with you, Sri. Is when I was a journalism student at Columbia and you were dean there, I was covering a court case and I was totally confused. I had no idea how to do anything. And I was in the elevator with Eligo, kind of, fangirling on him. And he tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "That's the lawyer for the case you're covering. Go chase him." And I thought it was great advice. And I ran after him and I got the scoop because of Eligo. So he was cool to us. He was cool. A New York Times reporter was cool to a journalism student.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, please tell us more of these inside tales as we continue reading the paper. How your comments make us better. Reader responses add an extra dimension to Times journalism and a lot more. This is Sona Patel, who's a friend, who was a speaker at our social media weekend a few months ago. She's part of the community team, and she's written this inside the Times. I know Neil loves this section and these comments. How do you look at comments, Sarah?
I have a mixed approach to them. I love the comments where they engage with the subject and story and really tell us things we missed, blah, blah. But then there are just some people who bring it back to Trump or who are very unkind. One of the tropes is, oh, the Times used to be great and now it's fine, when they see a typo. And I'm like, no, the Times is better than it ever has been. We produce more than we ever did. We have 50 million followers on Twitter. We're killing it. We're trying really hard. Don't get me for a typo. So I have, that's a little inside baseball. It's a real bummer that there's a guy on Twitter who only looks at your typos.
That's right. That's the New York Times typos Twitter feed. Right?
What a hateful dude.
I think he does it with some sense of fun sometimes, but
absolutely not. When you've written a story where you're sitting at the kitchen table with someone whose child has just died, and the man writes to you that you had a typo because there's extra space in your story, you're like, really? But I love the engaged comments. They're wonderful. Really, I highly recommend reading stories that get a ton of comments. They really make you think.
Yep, they do. And this is a headline in history. Today, in 1956, there were riots in London because of an American film called Rock Around the Clock, and teenagers were raising a ruckus, apparently, on this day. Here are ways in which the New York Times has changed, right? Where you've got these servicey stories, how to wake up on time. These are things that help you live kind of a modern life. And have you done these kind of servicey journalism pieces?
Well, my big expose into nail salons in 2016, it carried with it one of the first of those, which was really interesting, is that because of the amazing number of comments, I think we got 1,200 comments in the first, 1,200 emails in the first day. People asking, what can I do? And so then I ended up writing follow-ups on how to find a salon that was treating its employees right, what to do when you had a problem, how to avoid the chemicals that cause these terrible health effects in manicures that I documented. And so that was one of the first ever servicey things. But we really did an amazing pivot during the pandemic, changing the travel section into the at-home section, which is very much about telling you helpful tips on how to live life. And then the other thing we did is we purchased a vertical called Wirecutter, which is reviews of products, unbiased consumer reviews. So we've really engaged in servicey journalism in many different ways now.
And certainly, and that series you did was incredible and so powerful to read about nail salons. Can you just summarize that story for those who may have missed it?
Sure. So I looked into this essentially sweatshop in plain sight, which was the explosive growth of the New York City nail salon industry, and found that the low prices of manicures, they're $10 here, and the national average price was about $22.50, were really predicated on the exploitation of the worker. Starting salaries of a nail salon employee. Any guess, Sri?
No, very low.
Negative $200. You have to pay for your job, and you work for free until an arbitrary point when they decide you're good enough, and then you get about $30 a day. But you're paid differently depending on your race. A Korean manicurist is considered the best. She's the cleanest. She's the most beautiful. Then Chinese, slightly less, and then the Latinas at the bottom, considered dirty and stupid. They were paid differently. And then the second series of that was about the health effects manicurists face in these salons. There's no pre-market approval for cosmetic chemicals in this country, believe it or not. Still none. The law was written in 1938 when there were about 500 cosmetic chemicals. Now there are 5,000. And so products that are banned in other countries are permissible here. And you and I are exposed to only a little bit when we wash our faces and, put deodorant on our armpits. But these women were bathed in these chemicals for, entire days, 6 days a week. And many of them suffer serious health effects from it.
And you were really, in a way, that's also public service journalism, and that was very important. I see a note from Janine Miller who says, thanks for sharing. I love the story of journalism school and a young
Harrison.
Journalist.
Harrison?
I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry, you muted for a second.
I'm sorry. Okay. No, I was just reading Janine's comment here about the story of the journalism school and a young journalist. So that's great. And here is an ad. Your friends at Getaway. I don't know what this is, but I think it's a kind of portable house, maybe, or not portable, like a house you can set up. There are various versions of this, but getaway.house. And here is Kashmir's poets stifle their verses in a grip of crackdown titans. And there is another internet lockdown taking place in Kashmir right now. 12 die from toxic spill linked to Angola mine. Here's another ad about Governor Newsom and what's going on there. I hope that anybody who's watching in California, Doug and others, will all be voting no, so that we don't have a person who's unqualified but telegenic who becomes governor of the sixth largest economy in the world. Taliban fighters crush women's protest amid flickers of resistance. And Pakistani head of the ISI, the intelligence service, is there. Let's see. After stabbing attack, New Zealand examines its anti-terrorism efforts, and it bans or takes down knives from stores. They had a terrible stabbing incident the other day. Women's shelters close as the Taliban advance. And in withdrawal from Afghanistan, a Biden doctrine surfaces. And I thought what he said was really important, where he said, this is not about Afghanistan, this is about preventing future wars, where America goes to rebuild other countries in a democratic way. The first time that a president has said something like that and meant it. This is that South Africa story where a mob, multiple mobs have been killing black folks who are their neighbors, and this was because of a threat of looting, and really powerful story, well told here. Return of the beavers irks Scottish farmers. Once native species extinct for 400 years are now back and building their own dams, I gather, in Scotland. Democrats hit road to sell ambitious budget, and expansion of Medicaid in Oklahoma is a lifeline for tribal members. Did you end up studying the horses and their relationship with Native Americans and talking about that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Horses went extinct in America 10,000 years ago, and they were only reintroduced in the 1400s by Spanish conquistadors. And so native culture that we think of so enmeshed and intrinsically equine culture is actually globalization. They only started riding in the early 1500s. And I often, again, that's about identity and who do stories belong to. We think of England and tea as so entwined, but not a single tea leaf grows in the British Isles. That's from China and India, and that's a product of globalization. So debunking myths is what journalism does, right? And so I think in the debunking, you can see more stories.
Thank you. And that's a fascinating story about Native Americans and horses. Aerial images show substantial oil spills spreading off of Louisiana coast. And these images are really scary. Here you see the horse, the oil. I've got horse on my mind.
Yeah, you're sounding like me now.
Yeah, exactly. U.S. population density went up in the 2010s. Virus halts vibrant rebirth of lower Manhattan. And a small liberal Montana town silenced a neo-Nazi hate campaign. Just great to see small liberal Montana town. New Orleans residents see situation grow dire on day 6 without power. And the Buttigiegs welcome 2 children. I guess there are twins for Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and his husband Chasten, and their newborns Penelope Rose and Joseph August. And Willard Scott has died, 87. He was NBC's weatherman, was a folksy barrel of fun. And I love reading obits. Have you written any?
I have not written any obits ever, actually. I wrote an obit for a horse, believe it or not, once. That's the only obituary I've written. I was doing late night breaking news. I had an overnight shift, and I was watching a European championship. And as I was watching it, the most famous horse in the world unfortunately died in the middle of the competition. So I called the news desk. I said, "This is the most famous horse in the world. I think it should get an obituary." And they said yes.
And so you did. So that's an obituary. So
yeah, but for a horse.
And then Ernst van de Wettering, 83, an arbiter and leading authority on Rembrandt. And R. Murray Schafer, composer who set environmental soundscapes, dies at 88. Edward Greenfield, 98, judge with a writerly touch. It just so happens that today everyone here is a white man who died, but the Times has done a really good job trying to cover more stories of people of color and women. And we had Amy Padnani on the show. Amy was the creator of the Overlooked series, which is stunning work.
Yes, and I was about to say Amy is in the Old Girls Club. So part of her. Yeah, she inspires us.
Good. Here's the sports section. Are you apart from horse racing? What are your sports?
Horse racing is not my sport, actually. 22 horses die a week in American thoroughbred racing. And guess how many die in European thoroughbred racing a week, Sri?
Zero. Because
we are doing it wrong. And we've let the greed outpace the sport. And so it is certainly not my sport. But show jumping is my sport. And I'm a nerd. I don't watch any other sports.
And this is that story that you were talking about. This is the obituary you wrote, but they didn't run it in the obit section. They ran it obviously in the sports section.
Sports section, yeah.
Yeah. Very sad to see Naomi Osaka leave the U.S. Open. She lost in the third round. That was a big upset. And let's keep going. Where would you like to go next? We have about 30 minutes left with Sarah Maslin Nir. That's Sarah. Follow her on Twitter, please, at Sarah Maslin Nir. She's a New York Times breaking news writer. She's also the author of Horse Crazy, and we are giving her a chance to pick which section she'd like to talk about. I do want to just show another comment. Janine says, hello from Newburgh, New York, journalism class, Columbia Journalism class of 2004. My memories of journalism school. She's remembering them again because of this show, so thank you.
Nice. I think we should talk about that beautiful Modern Love.
Yes, so let's go here. Modern Love is part of the Sunday Style section, and Neil and Carla and Paula were able to set up this wonderful Valentine's Day edition of this show, the New York Times Read Along, because we booked Daniel Jones, the editor of Modern Love. So we'll get to that in just a second. Let's just look at this cover. It's from Lil Nas X to Cardi B. Sean Bankhead has choreographed many of the year's biggest music videos. And that's a great picture, and how he's standing there. And Liz Lang is going with the flow: maternity wear, Grey Gardens caftans, and now a family story she wants to share. And poetic justice in a contract: how Amanda Gorman and Estee Lauder paired up for change and why it matters. We're seeing slowly some changes in the fashion industry. So you're familiar with Zuck talk, right? Mark Zuckerberg's rhetorical tics have become ubiquitous. A speaking style that mixes confidence with filler words and a fear of pauses. I have to read the story.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Zuck talk.
And tell us about the polo story again, so if people miss that.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I examine in my book, Horse Crazy, is about, who do stories belong to and who do worlds belong to. So I used to say to my father, this isn't our world as Jewish immigrants. I'm interloping. It's Ralph Lauren's world of cashmere and jodhpurs. And he would say, Sarah, not Ralph Lauren's world, Ralphie Lifshitz. And that is actually Ralph Lauren's real name. He's Ralphie Lifshitz, a Jew from New York. And he created Americana par excellence, elite waspy Americana. And it's the beauty of America that you claim the identity you wish to project into the world. Right? White Christmas, written by Irving Berlin, another Jew.
Yeah, that's true. That I knew. And of course, Ralph Lauren's name is so interesting as well. By the way, we talked a lot about obits. We like to tell folks about Miss You Graham, which is a great way to pay tribute to people who have passed. So please check out Miss You, Graham. And then the Modern Love column, we talked about how we had Daniel Jones, the editor of the series, the host of the podcast, with us. And this is another story from South Africa. We talked a lot about the story about the race riots and attacks happening with the Indian community and the Black community in South Africa. There's a different story by Shabnam Khan, who's a writer in Durban, the same city that story was out of. And her latest book is How I Accidentally Became a Global Stock Photo. And this is a fascinating story. From a sale, lace undergarments never worn. It's a play on that famous, what's supposed to be the shortest short story ever. For sale, baby shoes never worn. And my mother told me, no man will marry you after 25. I'm learning to appreciate the view. And Shabnam writes about what it's like to be a Muslim, Indian Muslim in South Africa, where women are expected to get married early. And in fact, her mother starts a collection of pots and pans and other things for her, as well as a box of lacy undergarments
and lingerie,
and lingerie that she wants for her wedding. And her sisters get married and move away. And so the love story here is about a grown daughter, 36, and her parents in their 70s, and how during the pandemic and everything else they have come together. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially as we were talking about dads earlier.
Well, I'm looking for a paragraph in it while I read this. It's so interesting. She says that she ends up in her parents' love story. She said it's not unusual though it's rarely a woman of 36 isn't married, it's not unusual for them to live with their parents. And so the story takes a turn. She says, I have become part of their story, of their marriage, of their love. We have our own language, unspoken looks only we understand. My mother shakes her head slightly. She doesn't want me to rebuke my father for forgetting something. And my father and I have warning faces for one another if my mother is moody. They both listen in rapt attention as I tell them of the book I've read. And this is the best sentence. It is not quite the love I was expecting, but I'm learning that life is bigger than my expectations. It's incredible writing.
It's a beautiful essay. It is getting lots and lots of play online. And folks should check it out. It's called The Modern Love column. And they've started doing, for a few years now, these tiny love stories, which we can read because it's so short. So I'll just read it out loud. More chess? Yes. We met at a chess tournament when we were 17. He asked me if I wanted to play more chess. I said yes. The next morning, we met at a nearby Montreal park and played a few games. We continued playing through lunch, on the bus ride to an amusement park, at a picnic table, under the picnic table, during the dinner at KFC. And we even played blind chess, visualizing the game while in line for ice cream. When the day ended, he leaned over and kissed me. Quickly, we realized we love chess much more than this kissing stuff. By Olya K.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, very cute. All right. So one of the things we do is we love the social cues column by Philip. You might know how to pronounce his name. Maybe one of the things you can do for me is teach me how to pronounce all these people's names.
This one I don't know.
Okay, but when we say Philip Galans, no one's corrected me. But what I'll do is, this is the social cues column. I'm going to read out something, and then you tell me what your take is, and then we'll read it. There's no right or wrong answer. The gift is missing. A grateful client gave me and a coworker $100 gift cards to a local restaurant. When we tried to use them, we were told they had no value. I'm absolutely certain that a client bought them in good faith. At the same time, we would hate to make her feel bad about this. Should we tell her, or is it better to keep quiet?
Oh gosh, you say nothing at all. Say thank you so much. It is abysmal to embarrass somebody for a gift misdelivered. Come on.
I think you're right. My only caution would be, what if this is what she's doing for other people, and it continues to give these gifts because of some glitch? The gifts don't work, and nobody tells her that. Then she's, Well, anyway, let's see what Philip said. There's no right or wrong answer. Definitely tell her about the mistake, about the mishap, but make sure you do so in the context of thanking her. Problems with gift cards are not uncommon. If she calls the restaurant manager and explains the issue, that will probably clear things up. Think of it like this. If you were her, would you want to throw away $200 because of a technical glitch? So
I so disagree. Oh my God, we're gonna have to have a conversation back at the office if I ever see him ever again.
yeah. Okay, and
Shri,
here's a fun
Shri, it
story.
sounds like her dog disagrees as well. I just thought I'd mention that.
Exactly.
That's not
Tara,
my dog. I don't know whose
Oh,
dog
no,
that
that's
somebody's
mine.
dog.
That's my dog. That's
Or
Tara.
Tara disagrees.
Yeah, Tara disagrees. So we just want to tell you about a fun story that's in the paper today. Many of you have seen this meme of Daniel Craig saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, The Weeknd" on Saturday Night Live, introducing the act called The Weeknd, the musician called The Weeknd, and this young man, Miles Ryle, runs an account called at Craig Weekend, that all it does is on Friday afternoons send out that meme and that sentence by Daniel Craig. And a young man's Twitter account is popular for the relief it welcomes. And he's going to UC Davis, which is the same school my son is going to next week. And that gives me an excuse, Neil, to talk about next week's episode. Because you're going to be hosting, I'll be... Oh, yeah, we should play this first. Let's do that. Let's play this.
Ladies and gentlemen, The Weeknd.
Just because everyone loves The Weeknd, not like lowercase weekend.
Yes, that's because... Oh, you're not familiar with this?
No, I love it.
Oh, yeah, this is huge. He has like 300,000 followers, and all he does is that, just tweet that out every day, every Friday, and people follow that just because it's The Weeknd. But Neil, tell us about next weekend when you will be guest hosting.
Absolutely, Shri. And yeah, that was a really incredible meme. The Weeknd was the guest. The Weeknd also did the Super Bowl show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he did
this year. But coming up next weekend, we have some incredible guest. Peter Marks is the Washington Post theater critic. We'll be doing a WAPO read along. And in addition to spending time at the Post, he was actually at the New York Times as a drama critic, and he covered 9/11's impact on the arts. So we'll be obviously doing a special show with him and be looking at the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which is incredible. Really can't believe that it's been 20 years. Skipping ahead just quickly, Sri, after that, on September 19th, Jeanette Howard will be our guest. She collaborated with Billie Jean King on her autobiography, on King's autobiography, All In. It was just released by Knopf, debuted at number 5 on the bestseller list. Jean Pinder is going to be our guest September 26th. She was at the New York Times for 23 years and founded a website that focuses on transparency in healthcare costs. And then October 3rd, Jarrett Adams is going to be our guest. He is the author of Redeeming Justice: From Defendant to Defender, My Fight for Equity on Both Sides of a Broken System. So we have an excellent series of guests coming up. We hope everyone will join us.
Thank you, Neil. We are so excited to continue our chat here with Sarah and to look forward to our guests coming up. And it's going to be our 6th anniversary in October, so we'll find a fun way to mark that, of course. This is my setup here as I look at this. Before we leave this section, I see 2 horses, so I know Sarah would want to comment on this. Frugality can wait. The dream honeymoon returns. Couples are once again booking their romantic getaways.
Awesome. Great shot.
All right.
It's funny. I was just in Iceland riding my first vacation since the pandemic, riding indigenous Icelandic horses. And that same week, the volcano there erupted, and we had a story on the volcano, and so did the New Yorker. So it's funny that the horses follow you around. Horses bring you to the news.
They do. All right. Well, we have about 15 minutes left and a lot to cover. You go. What would you like?
I choose. Still?
Yes.
Let's do the book review. Love some good books.
Okay. So The Longest War is about 2 books coming out about the Afghanistan war. And we had John Branch on our show. John Branch, who wrote Side Country, Tales of Death and Life from the Backroads of Sports. Terrific writer. I didn't know Chris Wallace has a book out called Countdown Bin Laden. And let's keep going here. Jump in if you see anything Anything you want to respond to in the ads or the books or anything at all? Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. That should be a fun book. Sandra Cisneros, the writer, whose new book is Martita, I Remember You. And
I'm getting a nice compliment from Sudha here. Thank you so much. What a lovely thing
great.
to say.
Sudha Sarah is fantastic. She's multi-talented, and Sudha is Neil's mom watching, so all ties together. By the way, I got my son this book from Sam Sifton and Company, New York Times Cooking, No Recipe Recipes.
What's cool is the New York Times just launched a vertical, if anybody's interested in signing up for it, a newsletter called The Veggie, which pulls out their vegetarian cooking, which is me. I've been vegetarian.
I did not know that. Yeah. So,
yeah, just last week, and it's really, really good.
Okay, that's terrific. Okay, plotting an Upper East Side housewife believes her husband has skewered her in his latest novel, Mrs. March, by Virginia Fito. And it's called The Veggie. Tejal Rao shares the most delicious vegetarian recipes for weeknight cooking, packed lunches, and dinner parties.
And
I'm
everyone
looking at my
has
wife.
to make.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm looking at my wife Rupa, who loves vegetarian food, so telling her that there's a newsletter called The Veggie now. Sorry, you were saying.
Oh, everyone has to make Memphis dry rub mushrooms. I made them last night. Mind blowing. Probably one of the best dishes I've ever had from the Times. I will put them in the comments.
Very cool.
Yeah, incredible.
A Woman's Place, the first book in a planned trilogy fictionalizing the author's family history. In the Country of Others, Volume 1, War, by Laila Slimani, translated by Sam Taylor. The book is reviewed by Meena Kandaswamy, a poet and anti-caste activist, and the author most recently of the novel When I Hit You. And this is Slimani's grandmother.
An anti-caste activist, like caste in India?
Yeah, anti-caste activist. So that's, the equivalent of anti-racism in America, as you know.
Well, because everything ties to horses, Surya, I'm going to really quickly get in that there's actually a big movement among the Dalits to be allowed to participate in Bharat, which is the riding to your bride on a horse. And a big Dalit rights movement, Dalit were formerly called the Untouchables. They've been riding to the grooms to pick up their brides and been stoned to death in doing it, and they still do it, and they wear helmets, football helmets and football gear to protect themselves. And one Dalit man won the right to do it under police protection after fighting for many years. His town said he could ride to his wedding, but so as not to offend anyone, he had to go around the town. And he said, "No, I want to ride straight through town." And that ended up, being a big achievement. And that's in my book as well.
Wow, what a story. Okay, thank you so much. Let's see here. Katie Rofi reviews Still Mad, American Women Writers and the Feminist Imagination by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar. And look at Joan Didion, Susan Sontag, and Audre Lorde here in one page. This book looks fantastic. Spencer Ackerman's The Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump. And some of that has to do with the New York Times Magazine cover story about this FBI agent and all the things. He's a whistleblower about all the things they did to go after Muslims, innocent Muslims in America. And literature since 9/11.
I want to make one more plug.
Please.
I want to make a plug for another journalism school student of yours, Jennifer Jo Janish. She has came out 2 days ago called Turning Point 911, a Netflix series on what led us to Afghanistan. And it couldn't be a more timely thing. She's been working on it for years, and hers just came out. It's an incredible documentary to understand this stuff. And she was my classmate at journalism school.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see it. Thank you for that. Miriam Berkeley says, thanks for the veggie tip. Just signed up and at the link. So that's great. And here more books. There's so much. 14 Years at Guantanamo Bay, a memoir by Mansour Adafi and Antonio Aiello. Here is young Ralph Nader. And many of us who admire the work he did for consumers know also that his role as a spoiler in the 2000 election got us George Bush got us the wars, etc. So that's a mixed legacy for sure. And Joyce Carol Oates has a new book. There's so much to cover. How do New York Times reporters get to read everything in the New York Times?
There's a famous, I think it's which Salzberger said, I remember, but they said anyone who tells you they read the New York Times every single day, cover to cover, is either a very fast reader or a very good liar. And it's and then there's another thing: you can either read the news or write the news. You can't do both. So I certainly don't get the pleasure of reading the whole paper every day, but I do do my best effort to read at least the whole A section every single day. But it's a lot. They call it the Daily Miracle for a reason.
And this is that story by Janet Reitman interviewing the whistleblower in the Times. Tell us about the magazine and what you think of it as a fellow New York Times person.
Yeah, it's such a repository for richness, right? And it's great that the Times allows you to really write your stories and really play with words and convey things. But there's nothing like having the space to do it like the magazine. I want to point you guys to my colleague Jasmine Hughes, who is flipping back and forth between the magazine and Metro, doing double duty. She did this amazing profile of Lil Nas X, and actually now we're doing audio stories where she reads it as well, and that being able to showcase that talent, both hers and his, in the magazine is really powerful. I highly recommend. It's called The Subversive Pleasure of Lil Nas X, and he's certainly not a one-hit wonder. And neither is Jasmine.
Excellent, thank you. This is The Ethicist. My stepdad has Alzheimer's. How should I feel about my mom's dating someone else? Wow, powerful and difficult question. And this is The Ethicist column by Kwame Anthony Appiah. I do want to learn how to pronounce his name because I heard someone pronounce it differently on one of the podcasts, but he wasn't saying it, so I'm still not sure if I'm right. Letter of recommendation: Fermi problems. If you don't limit yourself to the questions you knew Google had a ready answer for, what would you want to know? So the question would be that she asked is, if we put all the pasta we eat in a year end to end, what percentage of Earth's circumference would that take up? I bet you could find that on Google if you did some math.
I have to say it would twice as much as the Earth for me. I'm pasta addict.
How to collect crystals. There's another service journalism. And A Chicken in Every Pot. A simple dish learned in Paris turns out to be timeless. Dory Greenspan. And the juices from the Dutch oven chicken. And it's called Dutch Oven Chicken and Vinaigrette. This is that story about 9/11 and the FBI agent who blew whistle. Ron Thomas says, I lived in New York City. I would read the entire paper on Sunday. I miss the paper. Digital is okay, but not like turning the pages. And that's why he's such a fan of this show and all this turning pages. Somebody once told me they love just the sound of this because they don't get that anymore. And here's more about Terry Aubrey. I really recommend everybody read this story to understand what's happened in this country. And let's see, for the Ojibwe, the big drum is a gathering to mourn, to process grief, to understand loss. Can it help us heal the wounds of the past year? So this is
Ojibwe, a native tribe. I haven't read the magazine yet today.
Yeah, no, I've not read this either. This is about the native tribe and what's happening there. And then Difficult Pleasures by Ismail Mohammed is in the provocative new book. Maggie Nelson explores the limits of intellectual freedom, but emerges as its most eloquent defender.
I also love her outfit. The picture, the thing about the magazine is it's so beautiful too. Like they styled her, they hire top photographers. It's just a sensory pleasure on all levels.
Yeah, and that's where you can really understand the power of the paper here. Are you a crossword puzzler or any puzzler?
I'm going to tell you a secret, which I do come out in my book about. I can't spell. I have a hard time with spelling. I'm a writer who can't spell. So I find crosswords very difficult. And so I was always told when I was a kid that I would never be a writer, that I was dumb or lazy because I wouldn't spell. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not either of those. And I persevered.
And did we have to give you, because I know there are professors at the journalism school who, if you make one typo, they give you back the paper, give you back the paper and things like that. Did you get accommodations, or what did you do?
No, none of that. I also didn't get a job at Vogue, which is a story in Horse Crazy. I was up for a top job at Vogue. I got through 32 girls and ended me and one other girl. And I handed in an edit test that said she always thought she was crazy, but it said she always though she was crazy. And they said to me, "What's this?" And I said, "I'm not perfect." And they said, "Vogue is." And I knew the interview was over.
Nobody's perfect, and not even Vogue. And this is definitely not Vogue. This is a nice coincidence. We're seeing Veronica Chambers, her book, Call and Response, The Story of Black Lives Matter. And she was a guest on our show and just an incredible journalist at the New York Times. And let's see here. And all right, we are basically out of time. So I do want to ask you, as a young lady making it through the world as you have, what do you think of Monica Lewinsky and her reemergence, and how she has handled everything?
Well, it's fascinating, the reclaiming of the story. I remember when I was a kid, we mocked Monica Lewinsky, and now we realize there are so many different dimensions to power and abuse in those interplays. And my colleague did a wonderful story, really putting her back on the map. I can't remember. My colleague who covered Hillary Clinton. Brain. She's wonderful and a friend. Sorry, it's early. And that was the first I saw Monica Lewinsky reclaim her narrative. And this is certainly reclaiming it to the max. It's fascinating to me. And it's also fascinating how it chronicles the cultural shift.
Yeah, it does. So here we are at the end of our show. We want to give Sarah a big shout out and a thank you. And we're going to ask her to hold on for just a minute, because we're going to do some housekeeping. But when we come back, we're going to ask her to be immodest and talk about her book one last time, so that everybody who is horse crazy and who's not horse crazy will want to pick it up. And of course, everybody knows someone who's perhaps horse crazy, or should be, or could be horse crazy. So we're going to come back to Sarah in just a minute. I'm going to have Neil come in and just do our wrap up, and then we'll go back to Sarah.
Sarah, thank you very much. We'll be back with you in just a moment. Before we bring back Sarah, and we also want to ask Sarah for a pro tip for journalists with the experience she's had. I think that would be really great. We want to definitely thank our team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baradakis. They do an incredible job helping us put this show together, from getting great guests to doing some of the research to putting the links in to articles. Thank you very much. You can follow them at Big Green Pen, at Steve DeReeve, at Julia L. Weeks, and at Kabara. And I will take a moment to congratulate our friend Julia. She is getting married this weekend. Julia, all the happiness in the world to you and Isra. We are so happy for you. I hope everything is going well down in Memphis. Speaking of our colleagues, Carla Baranakis puts out the Local Connection every week. It's a great newsletter with pro tips. That's the pro tip I was referring to earlier. So if Sarah offers one, we can maybe get it into the newsletter. The Local Connection newsletter is put out by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University, and it offers story ideas for journalists every week. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. bit.ly/local news tips. And as I mentioned earlier, we have great guests. There's the link. Again, Paula putting it on for folks. And as I mentioned earlier, we have some great guests coming up for this show. Next week, we will have Peter Marks. It'll be a WAPO read-along. And then after that, we'll have Jeanette Howard, Gene Pinder, and Jarrett Adams in succession, September 19th, 26th, and October 3rd. With that, Sri, we definitely want to make sure that some of these comments, Diana is talking about Monica Lewinsky is interesting. She follows her on Twitter. and she's funny apparently, which is interesting. Sarah was talking about. I remember being in D.C. I remember getting the newspaper that morning in January with on the front page and saying, "Oh my God, this is going to be huge." And obviously, it captivated the nation and captivated Kenneth Starr for a number of years. He was the special prosecutor. Emily Silverman, such a delight to hear Sarah in this format. Reading her article after reading her articles for years, looking forward to all to come. Thank you, Sarah. Diana saying thank you for a great show as well. And Sunny Slaughter, it was great listening to Sarah. Always appreciated. Doug Levy already ordered Sarah's book from Book Passage, an amazing local bookseller, and I believe there was a offer to be able to get a signature when you order through Book Passage. So thank you very much, Doug. And Paula Kiger is sharing her social links. And please follow Paula, connect with her on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So with that, Sri, and they're my accounts. And this is what Paula does. She makes sure that we can all be connected and make sure that people know how to connect with our team, how to follow, how to reach out, etc. There's Julia Weeks's information, and I'm sure that she will continue to do that. And she's mostly in Sri's Facebook page, but also putting comments into the LinkedIn page as well. So with that, we'll bring Sarah back in for some final thoughts. Sarah, thank you very much again. We want to give you the stage. Your final thoughts.
Sure. Well, one final thought is I hope at some point Sri tells his story about how he defeated James O'Keefe, if he hasn't yet, on this show. Because I tell that story at least once a month for the past 10 years. It's unbelievable. My biggest tip is be like Sri. And my second one is to use silence as an interview technique. I love to chat, and obviously we question people, but silence can be a super useful tool. People feel compelled to fill silence, especially when you have a pause, a pregnant pause that gets a little too pregnant. It's so easy, especially when somebody's telling a hard story, for them, you to comfort them or interject if they start to get their throat catches to go, don't. But no, to sit really silently allows people the space to reveal stuff they maybe wouldn't otherwise.
And if you can tell us more about your book, Horse Crazy.
Sure. Horse Crazy is a deeply reported look at obsession around the world through the lens of my own personal obsession with horses. You can purchase an autographed copy, and I'll even personalize it to you. I think they'll throw the link in at a store called Bravo's Book Nook. And I actually have 3 more books coming out in the next year, which will be children's versions of Horse Crazy. So a series on that. But it's been a delight to be on your show to talk about 2 things I love: journalism and horses in equal measure.
Oh wow, that's amazing. You have 3. So one is a children's version, or they're all children's versions?
They're all. So each chapter in Horse Crazy is named after a horse in my life, and is the umbrella that tells the story. So the children's series will eventually be 10 books, and it will. But each book will be its own standalone. So.
Wow. Wow, really amazing. Doug says, Sarah, you're giving away your best interview tool or trick. And Sunny says, that's important. Patricia says, thanks again for an awesome interview and production team. And Diana says, you're amazing. And Emily says, you're terrific in the classroom. So tell us about your connection to Emily.
Emily, you were my Latin teacher, right? Because, right, am I accurate on that? I blowing my mind because the salve makes me think she was saluting me in Latin, and I'm like, is that where? Because her graphic is a cartoon. I'm looking. Ita vero, it's true. My gosh, wow. Well, Emily is why I know, and I never called her Emily. Obviously, it was Mrs. Silverman. Was why I know words so well. The root of words are Latinate, and despite being unable to spell and being told I'm stupid all the time, I actually know all the words because of people like Emily. So it's an important discipline. And I appreciate saying I was terrific in the classroom, because I did not feel terrific for my years at this prestigious private school. In fact, I felt quite the otherwise, which I reveal in Horse Craze.
Wonderful, folks. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Please hit share right now, and your friends and family can watch this recording, because it'll be live again on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And Emily says, I'm a semi-regular here and was thrilled to see you as a guest. And Emily, thank you for your support as well. And everybody who's watching, thank you very much for being here live or later. And we've got great guests coming up next week, including another Washington Post read-along, our WAPO read-along. Neil will be hosting on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Peter Marks, the Washington Post theater critic, who's been the chief drama critic since 2002, but he spent 9 years at the New York Times, where he was a drama critic and a theater reporter. And of course, one of the stories we're looking at is how America and New York City are coming back because of events. So we have lots to talk about. It'll be an incredibly important show. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.